What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin Breeze here, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the LG Stylo 4 to the LG G7 ThinQ. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so these two phones are both from LG, except the Stylo 4 is advertised as more of the budget phone, and the LG G7 ThinQ is advertised as the company's flagship Android device. Now, the Stylo 4 comes in at $179, and the G7 ThinQ comes in at $750. So you can buy at least 3 Stylo 4s for the same price as one G7 ThinQ. So it'll be interesting in this video to see how these two devices compare. Now, both devices are available on a variety of carriers. I believe there's already an unlocked version of the G7 ThinQ out there, and there will be an unlocked version of the Stylo 4 eventually. But just to let you know, this is the Metro PCS version of the Stylo 4, and this is the T-Mobile version of the G7 ThinQ. Now, this version of the Stylo 4 comes in with 2GB of RAM and 32GB of storage, and this version of the G7 ThinQ comes in with 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage. So with the G7 ThinQ, you're getting double the RAM and double the internal storage. Now with both of these devices, you do have the option of installing a microSD card, and with that, you can add up to 512GB of additional storage. The processor that powers the Stylo 4 is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 450, and the G7 ThinQ is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845, which is a lot better of a processor. Now, both these devices feature very large displays. The Stylo 4 comes in with a 6.2-inch display at 1080p resolution, and the G7 ThinQ comes in at a slightly smaller 6.1-inch display. It comes in at a high resolution of 1440p. But really, in my opinion, both of these devices have great looking displays. Of course, I'm not going to deny that the G7 ThinQ has a better looking display of the two, but still, both devices have really good looking displays. Text looks sharp on both. They're both great for watching movies and videos, and just overall, they both have good displays. So you're not going to be disappointed by the displays in either device. Now, you'll want to keep in mind that on the G7 ThinQ, you do get a notch. Now, the notch kind of gives you a little bit of a better screen-to-body ratio as far as the front goes, but you are going to get that notch. So if you're not a big fan of the notch, then maybe the Stylo 4 will be your more preferred device, because that doesn't have one. So with the G7 ThinQ, not only are you getting a notch, but you're getting a slightly smaller display. So really, in general, you're getting a lot less usable display space here than you do get with the Stylo 4. But still, regardless, even with the notch, you're getting a pretty large display with the G7 ThinQ. Now, the Stylo 4 does not feature Gorilla Glass, but with the G7 ThinQ, you are getting Gorilla Glass 5, which is the latest version of the technology, so it's going to be a really durable glass display. Both of these devices feature on-screen Android navigation buttons, and you can see that right there. And then maybe this is a good chance to kind of show you how detailed the two displays are as far as resolution goes, so you can kind of observe that on your own. And then up top on the Stylo 4, you're getting a 5 megapixel camera, and on the G7 ThinQ, you're getting an 8 megapixel camera. Also up top on both devices, you're getting a light sensor, and you're getting the earpiece. Taking a look at the left side here, on the Stylo 4, you get the volume rockers, and you get a door, which inside has the SIM card slot and the microSD card slot. Then, on the G7 ThinQ, you get the volume rockers, and you get a special button there that triggers the Google Assistant. Now, taking a look at the right side of both of these devices, there's just the power button. Then, taking a look at the top, on the Stylo 4, all you have is the noise-canceling microphone, but on the G7 ThinQ, you get the noise-canceling microphone, and you get the door, which houses the SIM card slot and the microSD expansion slot. Taking a look at the bottom, on the Stylo 4, you get the 3.5mm headphone jack, the microphone, the USB Type-C port, the speaker, and the stylus. Then, on the G7 ThinQ, you get the 3.5mm headphone jack, the noise-canceling microphone, the USB Type-C port, the speaker slot, and no stylus. But both of these devices do feature fast charging. Now, while I'm on the topic of charging, I do want to mention that on the G7 ThinQ, you get wireless charging, and there is no wireless charging on the Stylo 4. Another thing is that on the LG Stylo 4, you get a 3,300 milliamp hour battery, but on the G7 ThinQ, you get a smaller battery at 3,000 milliamp hours. So I think that's kind of interesting considering that there is a larger pixel density on the G7 ThinQ. Also, there's a more powerful processor in here, so just the fact that this has a smaller battery is a little bit concerning. I would think if anything, you'd want to have a bigger battery in the G7 ThinQ than on the Stylo 4. So basically what this means is that the battery life on the Stylo 4 is going to be a lot longer than it's going to be on the G7 ThinQ. Now, taking a look at everything else on the back, we of course have this nice kind of clear coat here on both devices. Now, it does have its pros and cons. Of course, it does look good, but it is a fingerprint magnet. So if you don't like having fingerprints on your device, then maybe you don't want to buy either of these. Taking a look at the camera modules here, on the LG Stylo 4, you have a 13 megapixel camera. And on the G7 ThinQ, you have dual 16 megapixel cameras, which means that you get portrait mode with this device. Now, both devices have a flash, and both devices have a fingerprint sensor, but on the G7 ThinQ, you also have laser autofocus. Video recording on the Stylo 4 is going to max out at 1080p 30 frames per second, but on the LG G7 ThinQ, you're going to max out at 4K 60 frames per second. So you can record a lot higher quality video with the G7 ThinQ than you're going to be able to record with the Stylo 4. Now, before we dive into the software experience here, I did want to give you an idea of the actual size differences of these two devices. You can see that even though you do get a larger display on the Stylo 4, it actually isn't too much larger than the G7 ThinQ. I mean, it is of course larger, but really not by that much. So if one of your concerns is that the Stylo 4 is going to be too big for you, I wouldn't worry about that, because it's really not that much larger than the G7 ThinQ. Let's now do some speed tests on these devices to see how they differ in speed. So we're going to start off by starting up Chrome. Now I do have both of these devices cleared of everything that's running in the background, so I'm going to tap on the Chrome icons at the same time. 1, 2, 3. As you're able to see from that test, the LG G7 ThinQ was able to start up Chrome faster than the LG Stylo 4. Now for the next test, let's load up a website that I've never loaded up before on either of these devices. I'm going to pull up yahoo.com. Alright, 1, 2, 3, go. And again, on the LG G7 ThinQ, the website was able to load faster. Now another thing I'd like to point out here that's kind of interesting is how content shows up on these two devices. So you can see that on the G7 ThinQ, there is more content shown on the screen than on the Stylo 4. Which is kind of interesting because the Stylo 4 has a larger display, but when you think about it, the G7 ThinQ has a higher pixel density, so because of that, it can show more content at the same resolution. So this kind of gives you an idea of how much more content you can see on the display. You can see that this news story, for example, was able to fully show up on the G7 ThinQ, but meanwhile on the Stylo 4, it was cut off halfway. Again, not a big deal. I'm sure you could live with it either way, but that's just something to keep in mind, that you can fit more content on the screen, at least in a reading environment, on the LG G7 ThinQ. Now in this test, we're comparing how YouTube videos play on both devices. So I have the same video on both of these, and they're both playing at 1080p. So you can kind of get an idea. This is the default right here. And you can see that it is a little bit bigger on the Stylo 4, which makes sense because it's a larger display in general. But you can see that it is pretty similar. Now this is a very widescreen video here, so it doesn't fill up the whole screen anyway. But I'm going to try that pinch in function so that it'll fill up as much as possible in the screen. And you can see that after you do that, it's still pretty close in size. Now it's still a little bit smaller on the G7 ThinQ, and that's because this actually doesn't take advantage of the notch on the top. So unlike the iPhone X, when you pinch in the video, it doesn't form around the notch. It actually just kind of pretends that the notch isn't even there. So that could be good or bad. It kind of just depends on your personal preferences. But really, both of these devices are great for YouTube viewing experiences, and I'd imagine that it's the same way for Netflix. Basically, they're just both two phones with large displays with great colors. So if you want to buy either of these for watching videos, you're not going to be disappointed. Alright, and now for the final test, we're going to see how Temple Run loads on these two devices. So as of right now, the game is not running in the background, so I'm going to tap on the icons at the same time, and we'll see which of these two games starts first. 1, 2, 3, go. And you can see that the LG G7 ThinQ was able to load a lot faster than the LG Stylo 4. So that might give you a good idea of, across the board, what kind of performance to expect when trying to load high demanding games and applications. But at the same time, I do want to mention that the Stylo 4 had no problem loading this. So even though the G7 ThinQ is faster at loading the game, the Stylo 4 wasn't necessarily slow. So that's definitely something that I think you should keep in mind. Alright everybody, so that concludes my comparison between the LG Stylo 4 and the LG G7 ThinQ. Definitely let me know in the comments which of these two you'd pick up, and if you think the G7 ThinQ is worth the extra money. Also, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.